Here's a question most people can't answer, and honestly, most people are afraid to ask. Out of every 100 Americans who retire this year, how many of them actually have $500,000 or more saved? Think about that for a second. Not $1 million, not $2 million, just $500,000, $500,000. Is it 40 out of 100? Maybe 30? After a lifetime of working, saving, and watching financial advice channels, what do you think the real number is? When I first started digging into this data, I expected something uncomfortable. What I found was genuinely shocking, because the number isn't 40, it isn't 30, and it isn't even 20. The real percentage of American retirees who have $500,000 or more in savings sits somewhere around 10% or less, depending on which dataset you look at. That means roughly 9 out of every 10 Americans retire without $500,000, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. Today, we're going to understand exactly why that is, and more importantly, what it means for you. Now, I want to start with something that confused me for a long time. And honestly, I think it's designed to confuse people. When researchers and financial media report retirement savings, they talk about averages. And when I looked at the average 401k balance for Americans in their 60s, right at retirement age, the number actually sounds almost okay. The average 401k balance for people in their 60s? Around $573,000. For a second, I thought, okay, that's not too bad. People are hitting roughly that $500,000 mark on average. But then I looked at the median. The median is the number right in the middle. Half of people have more, half have less. And the median 401k balance for people in their 60s is just $210,000. That's a $363,000 gap between the average and the median. And that gap tells you everything about how American retirement savings actually work. One thing that kept showing up in my research was this pattern. A relatively small number of very wealthy households pull the average way up, creating this illusion that most people are doing okay. They're not. According to Federal Reserve data, the average retirement savings across all American families is $333,940, but the median is just $87,000. $87,000. That is the middle of America's retirement savings picture. Not $500,000, not even $200,000, $87,000. At a standard 4% withdrawal rate, the rule most financial planners use, $87,000 would generate about $3,480 per year in retirement income. That's $290 a month from an entire lifetime of working. The deeper I analyzed the behavior and circumstances of retirees across the U.S., the more a strange and uncomfortable pattern emerged. It wasn't just that people didn't save enough. It was that the system had multiple failure points that most people hit without even realizing it. Let me give you the real numbers. According to a 2023 study, 37% of retirees report having no retirement savings at all. That was actually an increase from 30% just a year earlier in 2022. Nearly 4 in 10 American retirees enter their golden years with zero saved. And according to a 2024 AARP survey, 1 in 5 Americans aged 50 and older, people who are right at the doorstep of retirement, have absolutely nothing saved. So how does this happen? 3 hidden mechanisms drive this crisis, and they rarely get talked about honestly. Mechanism 1. The access gap. For decades, millions of American workers in retail, restaurants, small businesses, gig work had no access to a 401k or employer-sponsored retirement plan at all. No account to save into, no employer match, no automatic payroll deduction. You can't save what you have no vehicle to save. Mechanism 2. The emergency drain. Even people who did open retirement accounts frequently had to raid them during hard times. Medical emergencies, job losses, recessions, the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. Every time the economy contracted, millions of Americans were forced to make a terrible choice: drain the retirement account or fall behind on the mortgage. Most chose the account. Mechanism 3. The compounding desert. Here's what makes this mathematically devastating. Missing even a decade of contributions in your 30s doesn't just mean losing 10 years of savings. Because of compounding, it can mean losing 3 to 4 times that amount by the time you retire. The people who most needed to start early were the ones least able to, and that gap never fully closed. One interpretation of this data: it's not primarily a discipline problem, it's a structural problem. Most Americans were never set up to retire with $500,000. So what does this actually look like in practice? What happens to the 90% of retirees who don't have $500,000? The answer is, most of them become overwhelmingly dependent on Social Security. According to Bankrate's 2025 Retirement Savings Report, 78% of retired adults rely on Social Security benefits once they've retired, and more than half say they are very reliant on it. That's their retirement plan: a check from the government averaging around $1,800 to $2,000 a month. For context, Americans now estimate they need $1.46 million to retire comfortably, a 53% increase from just 5 years ago. Most are retiring on a fraction of that. The gap between what people need and what they have is staggering. Financial planners typically target 70 to 80% of pre-retirement income as a benchmark for comfortable retirement. For a median household earning $80,000, that's $56,000 to $64,000 per year. But a median American couple retiring in 2026 is likely looking at Social Security income of around $35,000 to $40,000 combined, and a portfolio generating maybe $3,000 to $5,000 per year. That leaves an annual shortfall of anywhere between $10,000 and $17,000 every single year of retirement. That's not an abstraction. That is the lived reality for most American retirees right now. That's choosing between prescriptions and groceries. That's skipping dental work. That's relying on adult children. That's working a part-time job at 72 because there's no other option. And here's the part that hits hardest. Many of these people did exactly what they were told. They worked hard. They tried to save. The system just wasn't built to get them to $500,000. Now here's where the data becomes genuinely interesting. And this is what completely changed the way I think about long-term wealth building. When you look at the roughly 10% of retirees who do have $500,000 or more, a consistent behavioral pattern emerges in the research. And it's not what most people assume. It wasn't always about high income. There are plenty of high earners who retire with almost nothing. And there are plenty of modest earners, teachers, nurses, postal workers, who retire with more than $500,000. The difference was almost never the paycheck size. The difference was the behavior, started early. According to historical patterns in Federal Reserve data, households that started consistent retirement contributions before age 35, even small ones, were dramatically more likely to cross the $500,000 threshold than households that started late, regardless of income. What's the framework that emerges from this? A few consistent principles that behaviorally separate the top 10% from the rest. First, automaticity. They removed decisions from the equation. They set contributions to auto-increase. They used employer matches aggressively. They never had to decide to save. It happened without them. Second, they treated retirement accounts as untouchable. Even in hard times, they found other ways to bridge emergencies rather than withdrawing from retirement. Emergency funds served this purpose, a financial buffer that protected the compounding engine. Third, they understood the compounding, and they will never forget done through the mistaken. They look at anywhere the compounding important, they felt it. They checked their balance regularly enough to watch the momentum build. That psychological feedback. So we come back to where we started. Out of every 100 Americans retiring this year, roughly 10 will have $500,000 or more. Around 37 will have nothing at all. And the rest will fall somewhere in a difficult middle. Enough to feel okay now, but not enough to feel truly free. When I started studying how wealth is actually built, I thought the story of retirement savings was mostly about financial literacy. If people just knew the right strategies, they'd save more, invest smarter, and retire comfortably. The deeper I went into this data, the more I realized it's a far more complex story than that. It's about access and structure and the compounding weight of economic disadvantage. It's about a system that, for decades, wasn't built to carry most people across the finish line. But here's the truth that matters most for you watching this right now. You are not the average. You're here, asking the question, looking at the data. That alone puts you in a different category. The people who end up in that top 10% didn't do it because they were born lucky or found a magic investment strategy. According to historical patterns, they did it because they started and kept going, even when the numbers felt small and the finish line felt impossibly far. Only 3.2% of retirees have surpassed the $1 million mark. But the $500,000 club? The research suggests it's reachable for far more people than currently make it there. The math works. The tools exist. The question is whether the urgency is real enough and early enough to change behavior before time runs out. And that brings me to the question I want to leave you with today. If you knew, with certainty, exactly how much you'd have when you retire based on your current savings behavior, would you be okay with that number? Or would it change everything about what you do tomorrow? If this video made you think differently about retirement, consider sharing it with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe, because next week, we're going to look at exactly what it takes to build from $0 to $500,000 and what the timeline actually looks like at different starting ages. I'll see you in the next one.